Hey guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And this week, Bob makes his return back from Iraq in 1972. Going to take a look into just some of the talent he may have encountered back in the state of Florida, as well as his very first trip, maybe his second trip as well, over to Australia in 72 and 73. Going to try to get some fun stories out of Bob in regards to his many-time travel mate, Ronnie Garvin. Maybe we'll even sneak in a question or two about the old Tennessee stud Ron Fuller this week. The early years, guys. But at the end of the day, who knows what we're going to get into, so stay tuned on the other side. Before we get to that, just a quick reminder that you guys can listen to the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop and sister shows like the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. Also, the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. 3 projects going on right now at Regional Wrestling. It's Georgia 1981, the UWF in 1986, and Memphis in 1985. All going on right now at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to Bob's buddy, Barry Rose, and his partner, Captain Nick Massey, on the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. You get all the latest news. Everybody headed to the Glory Days GrappleCon, Orlando, Florida, April the 20th at the fabulous Rosen Center Hotel. Lots of great guest interviews on the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. And hey, how about this? It's the Pro Wrestling Academy podcast with the professor of Pro Resu himself, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Be sure to join that program as class is in session each and every week. Dan going to school us on the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia podcast network located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And be sure to follow me on social media, guys, for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. You can friend Bob on Facebook. Find him there at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can follow me, Ray Russell, on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade, and subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And last but most definitely not least, now would be a fantabulous time to become a WrestleCopia patron. Talking about that $5 all access tier over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of the Grenade, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to many of the podcasts here on WrestleCopia, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. Then from there, it's remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all. You also get digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series, covering many past WWF and WCW events. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month. I think you'll like all of the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into supporting the brand to help keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come. And all right, guys, it's that time of the episode again. Time to bring him back onto the show. Time for more great tales here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself. Welcome back, Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, thanks, Ray. Good to be back with you, my friend.
Oh, it's great to be back.
Yeah, I look forward to this every week, and with due cause. You know, I enjoy our output. We don't always get complete accolades. Some people have different opinions out there, but that's fine. Everybody has their own reality. Some of them are much different.
To put it lightly.
Yeah, much different than others.
Yes.
So, but it all works. You know, everybody's entitled to an opinion.
Except for when they think opinions are facts, facts are opinions, but that's another story, another episode of the show. Man, the last two-parter we just did, your trip over to Iraq was wild. Lots of crazy feedback. Lots of people, well, they know you made it back here safe. So that was really, truly all that mattered. You got to the safe haven at the end of last week's episode, And of course, they find a way to fly you back to the United States. Do you remember approximately what day that was that you got out of Iraq and headed back to the U.S.?
Let me look. I can tell you.
Well, we got you back here.
February. It was February. I was over there. I got back around the middle of February because I had time to work 16 matches for the rest of the month there in Florida. So I would have had to have been back by at least the 15th of the month.
I got you back a little earlier than that. I got you back in my results here. These could be inaccurate, but from what I got here on my notes, February 8th, you're back in the ring here.
Okay.
In St. Pete.
That rings a bell. Yeah, that rings a bell. You know what? I spent, 40 years trying to forget everything about going to Iraq. So,
well, you might have want to forget your first match back in the States as well, because your very first match back is against Johnny Valentine. I'm sure it took some liberties. Had some fun.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Johnny Valentine over Bob Roop on a DQ.
Was that the one at the Bayfront in St. Pete?
Yes, St. Pete.
Okay, we talked about that one, remember?
Okay, yeah, I remember you working Valentine, but I didn't know it was this match or another one. But yeah, that's crazy, man. You return from Iraq and your gift is Johnny Valentine on a silver platter.
Well, from a career standpoint, you talk about being thrilled. I didn't consider myself at his level he was a legend while he was still working.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
About him. And then again, when he worked with Jack Briscoe in Tampa, Eddie Graham had collared me and made sure that I stuck around to watch the match. He was interested in my development, Eddie was. So I had to watch the match because he wanted to see, and he talked about it. He explained how his psychology worked and why he worked the way he did. And we talked about this before, but Johnny had told him that, had told Eddie Graham that he developed a style based on watching himself on television. And whatever he did, when he watched his own work, whatever he did that didn't look absolutely real, he quit doing. So as he got older and, with years of bumps and all that, when you're young in the business, the way you can show things, you don't have the ring psychology of being able to do it just with a pose. Now, Valentine had gotten to the point where he could come to the ring and he would walk through the people, through the fans, as if the arena was empty. No reaction whatsoever. Again, totally ignoring them and making it obvious. And he would get up and go to get into the ring, and he would be standing on the apron, and he would go to lift his leg and put it through the ropes, like to step into the ring. And then he'd stop as if all of a sudden he just realized that there were people yelling at him. And all he had to do was just turn and look at the fans.
God,
and
man.
just look at them. And they go crazy.
That's real psychology. And he didn't have to do a triple Lindy flip off the top rope or anything like that.
No, he just look at them. And the fact that he was all of a sudden like he was coming out of a coma or something, he just recognized or just realized they were there. He looked to his left, and those people jump up and scream. And he looked to his right, they jump up and scream. First of all, I'd never seen anybody even try to do something like that. So it was new to me, but I thought, man, this guy, whatever he's got, I don't have a clue. If I had tried to do the same thing, the people watching me might have just started laughing or something like that.
Well, you know what's really funny about guys like Johnny Valentine and the original TV stars, if you will, is that they were the prototype of the heels, the Kangaroos of the tag team division, things like that. So when you see things done in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, beyond, we talk about Valentine doing that or the Kangaroos doing whatever some of the original heel spots were. Okay, well, yeah, we've seen that 100 times. Okay, but these guys were the originators, right? These guys, nobody taught them to do it. They're the ones that figured this out and handed it down from generation to generation. So that's what's so important about heels like a Johnny Valentine. On my Pro Wrestling Academy show, we're covering the history of Japanese wrestling. We went back all the way back to Ad Santel, who trained Luthez. And it was amazing some of the heel stuff he was doing. And this is on the Carney circuit. He's like, going out there, he beats a judo wrestler. He proclaims himself the judo champion of the world to piss off all the judoka out there. I mean, it was amazing how these guys learned, how to draw a crowd.
Right. Well, that's psychology. And again, in that day, you had to rely on things like that. Once the WWE became such a juggernaut and had just unlimited funds for example, you could have people coming down out of the rafters on a strap like Owen Hart and all the cage matches with all kind. Anyway, in other words, being able to throw money at creating situations and matches by being able to spend a lot of money to create all these different circumstances. Like again, having a cage with within a cage, on top of the cage, a ladder on top of the cage, and all that. Well, the regional, back in the days of the NWA regional territories, most promoters didn't have the wherewithal to do that. I mean, I think Jim Crockett could have, but if you're running 3 times a night, and like in the heyday of the Carolina territory, how can you afford to do that? You didn't need to do it, for one thing.
Right, no.
They were drawing just fine with just having wrestling. I think that's one of the gripes of a lot of old timers, is that they've replaced the ability to draw money has gone away from strict personalities. You still have your superstars like The Rock and Triple H and Undertaker, people like that. They also have a lot of things, like being able, for example, to hire Muhammad Ali to come in and be a referee, for example. Nobody was able to do that kind of thing. So it was a different way of doing things just by necessity. They didn't have all the extra money to put into these, or the time for that matter, to put into these special hardcore stuff. Yeah, a lot of the beef, a lot of the complaining about, it's not as good as the old days. Well, maybe not, but it's different. That's all.
Yeah.
And
well, the psychology isn't there like it used to be anyway, because it doesn't really. I'm not saying it doesn't need to be, but in their eyes, it's a lot less needing to talk you into the arena, and it's more about what can you do in the ring, what kind of flashy move, or like you said, what kind of structure can they put up around the ring to make everybody ooh and ah. So that adds to it on top of. This is just Johnny Valentine walking out, and that alone is going to get people to come and see and boo him because they hated him so much in this era here. And you get welcome back here with Johnny Valentine, and I just have to laugh at that because I noticed that was your first opponent back in the territory. And then there's some other names we've already talked about. Lots of the names, because you're going to be here for about 4 months now, February through May in the Florida territory, and names like Mike Paducas, Johnny Walker we brought up before. But I also see some new names that have recently entered the territory. Well, I see Bobby Shane here a few times. Looks like you teamed some with Jack Briscoe, Bearcat Wright, all names we've talked about in the past. But here's a couple of names that are going to be very much part of your career off and on throughout the rest of the 1970s and really even to the 1980s, some of them. And one of those names really sticks out to me because it seemed like he was a good traveling buddy of yours at some point in time. And I'm talking about Ronnie Garvin.
Yeah, Ronnie and I remember back then, my first real awareness of him, I had a match with him in Orlando. By that time, he'd been in the business 10 years. He started when he was 15, I think, from French Canada, I think Montreal area. And he got into business when he was 15 and came across into the United States, into Boston, and worked up there. What was the name of that promoter up there? Really weird guy.
Pfeffer?
Jack
Pfeffer.
Jack Pfeffer, yeah. He started working with Pfeffer. Yeah, he was, when I worked with him in Orlando, he was an experienced hand, and I was relatively green. I still remember the match. We did a thing where we had a good match, and he led it. And he did a thing where he came off the top turnbuckle and dropped a knee across your neck if you lay it flat. I mean, I didn't ever see too many people that did that because it's really difficult. And it looks like when you land, it looks like the guy's head ought to pop off. It looks like you could disconnect the guy's head from his body by landing like that. So maybe in a way it was an expose, but not really, not in pro wrestling. So anyway, he did that. And I'm pretty sure that 9 out of 10 people in the arena were convinced that I was beaten. And 1, 2 and a half, I kicked out. And then we did a deal where I ended up giving the shoulder breaker and winning the match. Well, that got me over like $1 million. I mean, I was over in Orlando. In fact, that that might even led to years later where I got into a program in Orlando with Rocky Johnson, maybe because I had the stature in Orlando and based on maybe a lot of it on that match with Ronnie. So, and the thing I remembered afterwards was how gracious he was. Now, he'd just done a job for me and got his shoulders pinned 1, 2, 3. Mm-hmm. And he thanked me afterwards. And again, I'm a rookie. And now he might have known the lay of the land and understood that I was getting a push. I don't think he was worried about my amateur status. You know, we weren't going to be fighting for any reason. He was total professional. And also,
by my understanding, Ron was probably one of the toughest guys to ever step foot in the locker room. Everything I've heard.
Yeah, years later, I'll just go here briefly. Years later, when we got in a situation, we were working out in the gym, and we were just going to push. Now, I was a Greco-Roman heavyweight, and pushing is a big part of being a Greco-Roman. You're pushing your opponent around, trying to wear him down to where you can get a hold on him, to where you can throw him to the mat. And Greco-Roman is just from the waist up, so it's really difficult to take a guy down. You can't attack his legs or trip him or use your legs anyway. So the point is, I was very adept. I had a lot of background in training and conditioning and pushing.
Right.
My pushing muscles are very well developed. Well, Ronnie was a few inches shorter than me. So he had a little bit lower base of gravity. But when we pushed, we'd be in a circle, like on a wrestling mat. They have a circle in the middle that say, 8 feet across. It'd be like a sumo match almost.
Right, exactly.
And I couldn't push him out of the circle. He couldn't push me, but I mean, I was down to about 220 at the time. He was about 200, 210. But he was strong, and he was, again, having that lower base of gravity, he could get a little bit lower than me. So it's hard to push when you're trying to push from the top. But I just remember how strong he was. I couldn't move him. But what a great workout we had doing that. It only took about a minute, and you would be like if you had worked out with the weights for a half hour, then run about a mile or two. You get that same effect because you're pushing, you're using your whole body, you're using all the muscles in your body, your legs, your back, your arms, your neck, everything. You're using all your muscles and doing that, so you get a total body workout all in one exercise, which is really. So I was always impressed with Ronnie. He was the real deal. He wasn't a tough guy in terms of pushing his weight around, but he wasn't afraid to.
Right. He's one of those silent guys, the guys you don't want to mess with, right?
Yeah, because you'd never know he was mad at you till he broke the bat across the back of your head.
I love it. Yeah. I didn't mean to take you off the original story. I don't know if there was more to it. You were explaining how gracious he was after the match because he's the one that does the job for you, Bob Roop.
Right.
And then you're back in the locker room or whatever the situation may be. I don't know. Was there more to it? I apologize for getting off the topic.
No, okay. No, but I was just impressed. I was just impressed that he was so gracious. He acted like he had beat me.
Okay.
He was so, I didn't get a lot of, some of the other people I worked against, especially heels, were not as thrilled about doing a job for me. I mean, they were okay, but they weren't. Ronnie was just, it was like he was happy about it, and maybe in a sense he was. I don't know. He was smart enough to know that anybody watching from the office, if they were told to keep an eye on me and my match, was going to be making a real good report about the match. So he was getting himself over. And that's the office hold. He was getting himself over with the promotion by doing that. By what he did in terms of think about it. That was, 50 years ago? I'm still talking about it, right?
Right,
so, yeah. So, that was just a really smart move on his part. Inside he might have been saying, well, here I am having to put over this rookie, can't barely lace up his boots, and I'm putting him over. But I don't think so. He had a really good attitude, and he knew how to make money. He was willing to travel, and if he wasn't making money in one place, he'd go somewhere else. And yeah, he was vastly experienced, and our paths crossed for years and years afterwards, including even after we both were retired from active wrestling. He had a place down in West Virginia. I used to go down there and visit him, stay down there a week or two.
Okay.
One year we drove from his place in West Virginia down to, he still had a home in Charlotte. His wife was still working down there. She hadn't been able to retire yet. So they maintained that home. We went down there for a day or two, and then we drove down and visited Don Curtis's widow, Dottie Curtis.
Dottie, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was a real fine lady. And
did she still have a keg of beer in the living room? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah. Still a fine character. No, I tell you what was funny, though, when we went to see her, we went to her house, and I walked in, and I didn't recognize it. I thought, well, what? I was uncomfortable because I didn't know. I just didn't recognize the house. So finally, after being there a half hour or so, she came up in the conversation that they had renovated and had a big section added to their house. Okay. And that's where we were, and that's why I didn't recognize it. But, yeah, we stayed with Dottie overnight, and then we drove down to Tampa. A buddy of Ronnie that he used to go scuba diving with, or snorkeling, or both, back in the day, had a stroke and was in the hospital. What was his name? Well, it comes to me. Anyway, we went down and visited him in the hospital, and then we drove back up to, we both had some property in a little town near Tallahassee. We stopped up there to look at our property, and Jerry Prater, who was the PR guy and made the wrestling magazine and did all the publicity type stuff for Championship Wrestling, lived up there in that area too. We tried to go see him, but we weren't able to. But we stopped in this little town to spend the night, and just to get a motel. That was the one place we were going to have to get a motel, and we went to about 6 places, including one place 3 times, trying to get the best price. And finally, Ronnie talked this guy down from. He started out, I think, at $45. He talked him down to about 35 by coming back for the 3rd time. And that's just the way it was. The reason Ronnie had money, he's one of the guys that saved his money and still has it, I hope. I hope he does.
I believe he does.
Yeah, by doing just that. He would save his money, and he'd look for ways to keep trying and get guys to lower their price. So, and then we went back to Charlotte. I spent a day or two there before we did all this in my van before I drove back to Michigan. But the point is, in that 4 days, I don't know if we ever turned the radio on at all. Most of the time we were talking and telling stories. And even if Ronnie had told me the story, I'd heard it say every summer that I visited, I heard the same story. He would start it and he'd say, "Oh, you've heard this one," or whatever. And I said, "No, go ahead and tell me again. That's a good story." And I tell you what happens from that is that once in a while, that's the same old story. He's going down that same path that leads to that story, goes through that story, and he'll discover a new outlet that he forgot. And he'll go down and tell me about something new that he remembered from that same old story I had heard maybe 10 times before. So that was always kind of fun. But, you're getting a history lesson from a guy that was a very interesting guy, because he talked about him and Terry Garvin when they started up in Montreal. One of their first jobs, they were kids, they were in their teens, they were teenagers, was to go, they were hired as gunsels to go to the polls, the voting places in Montreal, and run off people, intimidate people who were voting for an opponent of the person who hired them. So they were like, rough trade. Now, I didn't approve of that stuff, but, I found it interesting because people have different backgrounds, right? Ronnie and I had completely different backgrounds, but we had the commonality of pro wrestling that created so many things we did have in common that those backgrounds didn't really matter. Yeah, he is an interesting. He's still around. He's an interesting guy, and wow. Yeah, I got nothing but admiration for Ronnie. He's one of the guys. He's a success story because there's so many guys that don't save their money, and they don't have anything else to lean on when they get out of wrestling. And the ones that we talked about this before, but the ones that their only claim to fame really was their wrestling persona. And when they get out of the business, they can't say, "Well, wait a minute, my name really isn't Habada, my name is John Smith." They couldn't do that because John Smith meant nothing. They didn't have the fan fest things yet. retirement was basically, just exile in a sense. You couldn't really go back and go back in the dressing rooms for a visit during a show because, a show's going on. People didn't have time. I remember very few visits, and usually the only people who would visit would be someone. I remember in Miami one time, Yvon Robert. Does that name ring any bells?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he came into the dressing room to say hi, and I remember meeting him, and I didn't know anything about him or whatever, but apparently he was a guy of some stature, because he was well received. But
right.
That's Ronnie, a great talent, good guy. Unfortunately, we had I hope it doesn't persist, but we got on opposite sides of the political divide a few years ago, and kind of cooled things between us. But I still respect Ronnie tremendously.
I've got to say, Bob, from my point of view, in the however long 6-7 months we've been not just recording but just talking even off air, I've never heard you say anything but glowing things about Ronnie Garvin, the human being, the wrestler, all the way around. So I hear what you're saying about the whole political divide thing there. I get it. It happens. But at the same time, I will say, just from an outsider looking in, it's not something that's turned you on him. It's not anything like that. No, you've had nothing but, it's from top to bottom. I've never even heard you say anything negative about Ron Garvin. So that's why I figured when I brought up his name today, we were going to get something good out of this. And I had not heard that story. I'm not saying that it's not out there. There are stories out there that I simply haven't heard yet, but the stuff about him being hired like a gunsel. Wow. That was good stuff.
Oh yeah, he and Terry were pranksters. They just had a blast and being outrageous. They were in the Don Fargo class without doing the hard way stuff. But I mean, in terms of being outrageous, Terry liked to apparently take all his clothes off and stand out there in public. So, there was a story Ronnie told me about Terry that it was a wedding and he was there as I don't remember if he was related to the people who were getting married or whatever, but apparently he was known well enough to be there. The last thing Ronnie told me about the wedding was when the bride and the groom were out there getting ready to get into a vehicle and take off on their honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
Terry was sitting up on the roof of the house. All the people in the wedding were out there to wait to have the people say goodbye.
Right.
And Terry's up on the roof of the house. He's up there and yelling, bye, bye. And he's naked. He's standing up on the roof of the house.
Phenomenal.
All these people look up and there's Terry naked. Well, I mean, it's so outrageous. It's so just, people go, wait.
That's a hell of a send-off for the honeymoon, that's for sure.
Yeah. He meant to get them in the mood for the bedroom, I guess. But I don't know, maybe depending on what he was looking like at the time. I saw him later when he was kind of heavy. I mean, that might be a turnoff, but you have to give credit where it's due. Terry was not one, and Ronnie either, were not ones to bow to convention just for convention's sake. To say, okay, I'm in a situation here now. I'm going to be appropriate in everything I do, and they would wait for their moment. And now Terry waited till the very last.
Sure.
He didn't do it earlier, where make everybody awkward around him the rest of the time. But again, when I first started, I would have considered that just so wrong to do that kind of thing. It's just, how could you do that? That's just terrible. But after being in the business for a while and realizing what kind of, we're show business, and what kind of, you talk about showing everything you got.
Right. Well, that is definitely show business.
When you're standing naked on a roof in front of a couple hundred people, I guess that's
what they call, I believe, the good old days, Bob, when you could do things like that. Not so much today, but there's camera phones and things as well. But yeah, it's just, I've heard stories of Terry Garvin, Ron Garvin, the good old days, and poor Jimmy Garvin breaking in as a teenager there, having to walk around with those two. I can't imagine what he had to deal with on the day-to-day.
Oh, God.
And think about that, because Jimmy Garvin, he didn't even really get to peak until the 80s. He was a kid, literally a kid, when he broke in as their valet. And, so it's kind of, he got a really early crash course in life as well. Now, later on, he was the kayfabe brother of Ron Garvin, but in real life, Ronnie Garvin was his father, his stepfather. So
Right. Yeah, and that was another thing to mention, that Ronnie's first wife, Geneva, was a real character in her own right. She was deep. She was very attractive, and she had a deep kind of a personality about her. And I was intrigued with her, not in a personal way. I would never step into anybody in like a romantic situation, but just as someone who I found interesting. We talk about things like transcendental meditation, traveling through space,
Wow.
astral projection, those kind of things. I remember one time, and you talk about making people nervous. We were with Jimmy and his wife. Was his wife Precious?
Yes.
Yeah, and what was her real name? I knew her.
Patty.
Yeah, I knew her well when they first started together.
Okay.
And I didn't get to see her much later on, but at one time I knew her well enough to be like on a first name basis and be friends with her.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were all in Florida, but one time Geneva and I were, I think, at Jimmy's house, so they were at her place, and Jimmy and Patty were there, and Geneva and I just started I don't know what we were doing. We were looking at each other's eyes to see if something, I don't know, maybe reading minds. I don't know, but something weird, but different.
Where was Chris Colt during this situation?
Yeah. Well, what ended up happening is we just sat there, just breathing, and we're just looking at each other, looking in the eyes without saying a word for like 4 or 5 minutes. Well, Jimmy and Patty got very nervous about that because, I mean, what is this? Is Bob making a move on my mom? I mean, what is this?
Right.
And I remember another one, poor Jimmy. I went to their place in Tampa, and he and Patty were up in bed, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I took a butcher knife.
Oh my God!
I had an orange or something, or something that I was trying to peel, and I couldn't find a small knife, so the only one I could find was butcher knife. I went up to her bedroom, and I'm talking to him while I'm peeling this thing. I got a butcher knife with about a 10-inch blade in my hand. I scared the absolute. I mean, they knew me, and I assumed, look, I'm Bob Roop. I'm not crazy. But he told me later I scared the crap out of him.
Yeah, I'm Bob Roop. I'm just hanging out in your guys' bedroom, peeling an orange with a butcher knife. That's just regular wrestling. another day at the office for certain. Yes.
Just well, you bring up Jimmy's name, and
oh my God. I'm glad you told those stories. Those, no problem. Whenever we don't pass up a good story.
I thought Patty needed a mention too. I mean,
oh yeah,
she had to put up with my boorish behavior, but Jimmy was fun. Geneva and all of them. Ronnie was interesting. That was another thing. He still is, but I mean, he was fun to be around because he was provocative. He'd tell stories. He'd rib. He'd tell jokes. He had a good mind. He was witty. Another thing, that place he had in West Virginia, he built it. He did everything he could do.
That doesn't surprise me.
That didn't take like a team, like to pour the footing and all that, the concrete and all that. He had to hire people to do that, but he did everything up to the actual pouring of the concrete. He did everything that was possible before that, so he could get it done as cheaply as possible. He had to hire someone to bulldoze a road so he could get up to his place. He bought a mountain basically at an auction. I paid, I don't know, $45,000, $50,000 for it, and he flattened the top of it to build this house. He was an interesting person. Very few wrestlers did stuff like this. They didn't. And Ronnie was still working too. I mean, I say working. He he was retired from everyday work, but he would get bookings, and I think he was charging $1,500, $2,000 just to make an appearance.
Yeah, I know. There's some matches out there of Garvin popping up, but like you said, basically semi-retired, I guess we could call it. I know he even worked for Jim Cornette up in Knoxville a time or two in the early to mid 90s, but he basically finished up full time when he left Vince in the fall of 1990.
Well, yeah, the full-time part, yes. And he did real well there, too. He was a pilot, and for a while until McMahon put the Snavis on it or canceled it. Ronnie was taking guys and flying them from one spot to another, where they didn't have to stay overnight in the town they were at and take a plane out the next morning. They could go wherever they were going to go the night before. He would fly them directly to the next town or back home.
That had to be nice.
Going. Well, they would just hand him their tickets for the airplane.
Yeah,
they would give them their ticket that they were issued from the McMahon's office for that flight, and that was how they paid him to carry him. So he would carry a twin-engine plane. I think it could seat 8 people or maybe 7. So he would take, even if it was only 5. So he's got 5 guys their tickets might be worth, I don't know, $1,000 for
depending on where they're going from city to city.
Yeah, and he did that for a year or two. So as well as making money, Ronnie got in there. He'd been NWA champion.
Right.
Dusty was in there. He was a former NWA champion.
Mm-hmm.
Harley was in there. He was a former NWA champion. And Ric Flair was in there. He was a former NWA champion. I thought it was interesting the way those guys got used because, McMahon had a serious, had a fight with the NWA.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't a fight. Actually, it was a slaughter. But, he just was overwhelming. He could afford to buy TVs and, to pay to have his TV put on the air. And nobody could do that. Everybody else did barter, where every 1-hour show has 12 minutes of commercial time, and you would barter with a TV station that they could take. Well, if they demanded all 12 minutes, that's what you gave them. But they might insist on, say, 8. They could promote, they could sell that advertising time to their customers who wanted to advertise on their TV station. So, but McMahon could just go on, because we tried to compete against him in Florida with we'll get down this at the very end of my career with the Global Wrestling Alliance.
Right.
We were trying to get on the air in St. Petersburg. There was a station there, I think Channel 44, went all the way down through Florida. And we were trying to get on there. We couldn't afford to buy the time. Well, McMahon was already on there with 2 shows. And I think he was paying $4,000 a week for each one of them. So we tried to get on there with a barter deal, and we almost made it. But we'll have to go into why not down the road somewhere.
Okay.
There was some backstabbing treachery that
not in the wrestling business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, people normally were on the lookout for it, and you didn't have it so much on like a regular promotion back in the day when every car's going down the road. There might be backstabbing in the cars, guys knocking other guys because they always felt that they should be they should be in the main
spot.
Yeah, they would always, not always, but the guys who really, I felt like demeaned themselves by doing it, they would claim that the person had their spot because they were a stooge or, whatever. And we talked about this before, like Bobby Shane going into the office to run his program with the booker. That wasn't being a stooge. Bobby was getting on top, but Bobby was getting on top using his own program.
Right.
It wasn't something that they had to make up for him. He didn't go in there and beg them to create an angle for him. He had already created it and brought it to him. So that was the office hold. A lot of the boys didn't have that. They didn't know how to do that, or they didn't think they had the personal clout to be able to go, or maybe they didn't have the track record. A lot of the guys that are doing the complaining were not Johnny Valentine or someone who, like Bobby Shane, who'd been in the business since he was 10 years old. His whole life, actually. His dad was a referee, but, who'd been able to learn the business at a very early age. By the time Bobby started working, he was an experience at the office hold, at how to, his dad being a referee.
Right.
His dad was involved. I'm not sure how close they were and how much his father talked to him about it. But if Bobby wanted a sounding board or someone to run his questions about how to succeed in the business, his dad would have been a wonderful source, in my mind, of what to do and what not to do.
Well, there's one thing that everybody says about Bobby Shane, and that is that he was a very smart guy. So I'm thinking, as smart as everybody puts him over as being, if he was truly that smart, he was probably learning whether his dad was actually teaching him anything or not. He was probably picking things up through osmosis growing up as well.
I agree. He was a smart guy. He had a good mind. Yeah, and I never got to know him well enough. I'm saying good mind based on his results.
Right.
He was on top wherever he went. If he wasn't, he didn't stay there. He'd go somewhere else. But and I don't even know if he had to do that. And then once he had success, again, at an angle, not just learning to work, but at an angle where he could draw money with a personal feud with somebody, that Bobby could call to another territory. He would have scouted in advance and see who was there and what they were doing, who was maybe at loose ends as somebody he could work the program with. And he would pitch the idea to the booker or whoever he needed to talk to get the okay. At one time, I'm not sure Jim Crockett Sr. listened to people's appeal for work himself or had him talk to George Becker and Johnny Weaver or whoever his bookers were at the time.
Right.
But back for a second to the guys all going to the NWA champs going to the WWF. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Dusty was used a little bit, and then he was like a road agent, right?
He came in and he left Crockett. Well, he was basically pushed out. They removed him as booker after Turner took over. He just wasn't wanting to play by the rules, and the business had started sliding down because Dusty had been booking the same routine for a few years there. So he was gone by the beginning of '89. He winds up with Vince somewhere around the end of the spring, something like that, after he tries his hand at a Florida territory, the PWF or whatever it was. That doesn't work out. He winds up, well, maybe it was more like the summer, but Dusty pops up with Vince, and Vince sticks him in polka dots. And,
right.
And Dusty gets it over, though. God bless, he got it over,
yeah.
Bob.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up on the polka dots, so it worked for me. And then Vince, I don't know if you remember this, but then he sticks him with a black valet manager by the name of Sweet Sapphire, this heavy set black lady who I guess she'd had some training in wrestling. She'd worked some outlaw shows back in the day, but he sticks her with her and they get that over. So Dusty's just shoving it in Vince, and I'm sure they're just having fun with each other with it. But yeah, by the end of 90, Dusty's gone. So I don't know what he was doing, if he was doing anything in the back end of the office, because he was working on TV the entire time. But, obviously, what happens at the beginning of 91. Dusty leaves and heads back to Turner, and then that's when you and Ole are given notice.
Right. Okay, that's Dusty. Harley went in there, and they ended up putting some kind of
king.
Crown on
He was the
Harley.
king.
Yeah, the king. And my point is that these guys were the NWA champions. Now, Flair had a good run.
Yeah.
I think he was young enough, and he was, I think, talented enough and smart enough that he was going to be used in a way that was, what I'm thinking is that the champions that came in from the NWA did not get pushed as like serious, like a Johnny Valentine, like a serious heel or a babyface. They were given these gimmicks that to me were, I don't want to say clownish, but polka dots and, wearing the crown and all that.
Right.
I just thought that maybe he was, I don't want to say poking fun, but like getting a little bit payback of someone who had given him some problems in the past. That midnight takeover down there where he ended up getting Ole's show off
TBS.
Off of TBS. I think that ended up costing him money. I don't know if he was upset about it. Probably not. Maybe not. But who knows? I don't know the guy. So.
Hey guys, you're invited to join us April 20th, Orlando, Florida at the fabulous Rosen Center Hotel for Barry Rose and Captain Nick Massey's Glory Days GrappleCon. Tickets available right now at eventbrite.com. It's a full day of events, meet and greet with dozens of your favorite wrestling superstars, both past and present. It all kicks off 10:30 in the morning. Ron Simmons, a special 1-hour Q&A session. Damn! Then from there, meet and greet all of the great superstars in attendance. Get your pictures, get your autographs, and spend some time. Have some conversations. Make a memory. Before we head off to the Legends of World Class reunion panel, hosted by former announcer Mark Lawrence. Just some of the names on the panel include Brian Adias, Al Perez, the one-man gang Missy Hyatt, and Jack Victory. They're going to go back in time and discuss their time in the world-class territory. Then from there, late in the evening, it's a shot of Jack with Jack Victory. So come on in, stop by, have a good time, have some drinks, and most assuredly, have quite a few laughs as well. Again, mark your calendars, April 20th, Orlando, Florida, the Rosen Center Hotel. It's the Glory Days Grapple Con. Get your tickets today over at eventbrite.com.
Well, anyway, should we talk about someone else?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about someone else here. I'm scrolling through these results here in April, May-ish of 1972, and a name pops up repeatedly. Now, you worked Ronnie Garvin. He was a heel, you were a babyface, so you guys were on opposite sides of the ring. But there's another name who was a babyface alongside you, Bob, and it looks like you team up with him quite a few times here in the early part of 72, and another name that is synonymous with you for all the wrong reasons. But you can't help talk about Bob Roop without sometimes this name coming up. And I am referring to one Ron Fuller, the Tennessee stud. I was curious, we're not getting into Knoxville yet, Bob. Everybody's probably getting a little excited, but I was just going to ask you maybe some early stories of Ron Fuller, early memories of Ron Fuller here in the early 1970s.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning with Ron. He was one of the guys that I had. Paul Orndorff, Dick Slater, Mike Graham came along, not for the same reasons. Those guys, and Ron Fuller, I'm not sure if Brian Blair was there yet, but I was working. Eddie Graham wanted me to work out with these guys, not to stretch them. He wanted me to show them.
Actually break these guys in, right? This isn't just the old Eddie Graham, rough them up, Bob, so I can knock them out.
No, not at all. I wouldn't have done it. But it was to show them how to defend themselves on their feet, not down on a mat, but on their feet. Now, everybody can fight, punch, kick, gouge, bite, whatever. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to teach them that. And that all depends on, what kind of nature a person has or whether those things are weapons or not. Some people would say, well, I would never do that. Yeah, if you had a guy that was trying to stick a knife through your ear, you might do that. If you got a chance to bite his nose off to save your life, I think you might change your mind about what you wouldn't do to save yourself,
right,
or your loved ones. But to protect themselves on their feet, this story has a result that ties right in with this. Yeah, to teach the guys how to not let somebody take them down, because that's all you had to do was take them down to where they couldn't get away. And their career within a minute. If they're just laying there, they can't get away, their career's over in that town. Or if it's on television, and now everybody have it on their camera, on their phone, it'd be all over the world. Career would be over. Some little puke of some kind. I'm talking about if it's not a wrestler who does it. We're not talking about against other wrestlers. We're talking about someone from the outside, a fan or whoever might be in there. Just teach them basically how to protect themselves. Well, Ron, being 6'7", 8, 9, whatever he is,
he's a tall dude.
Well, he's also very vulnerable because of the fact I just talked about Ronnie Garvin being a couple inches shorter than me, and
right,
therefore able to get his center of gravity under mine. Well, his center of gravity was like 3 or 4 inches higher than mine. I could throw Ron Fuller. I could get a hold on him, a front body lock, like a bear hug, and I could throw him easily because I was under his center of gravity. And all I had to do was lift him off his feet, and he would be, even up on his tiptoes, and he'd be powerless. You can't bring your strength to bear when you're off balance and you can't set your feet. I'm not sure why he was there, because basically it was kind of hopeless. He needed to spend some time, like an hour or two, twice a week, with a amateur wrestler, and learn how to do takedowns, and especially how to defend against them. But anyway, that was my initial contact with him personally, and he was he was likable. He was the son of a partner in the Florida office. Not that didn't really, there wasn't any nepotism there. I mean, you didn't have to like Ron because his dad was a partner in the promotion. But
Buddy Fuller, you're talking
Buddy
about.
Fuller's son,
Right.
yeah. Well, I mean, Lester Welch had his two boys working too. I don't want to knock the guys, but Ron at least now he was an athlete. I'd never heard of a basketball player that went on to be a pro wrestler. A lot of football players, but basketball doesn't usually transpose to wrestling because football is a contact sport. Basketball is too, especially if you're playing in the center or in the middle under the basket area like Ron was. You're in contact with the other guy. I mean, your bodies are in contact. You're not allowed to grab guys or anything, but you're elbowing whatever trying to get position. So, you can be tough under there, but that doesn't have anything to do with wrestling. That's not good training for wrestling. You're not going to be shoving a guy with your hip or backing into him in amateur wrestling to keep him, to take him down. I'm left with no real memory of any of those guys from that training. And again, I'm not trying to come across as being this big stud, but at the time I was, 270 pounds and an Olympian. These guys had no amateur background. I mean, they never were able to demonstrate it against me. Now, do you have anything in mind where Fuller and I meet before Australia?
So I'm just seeing some tag team matches here. You're teaming with Ron off and on. I think you might have even teamed with him prior to this period as well, a little bit there in 71, if I'm not mistaken, but nothing big. I do know you guys will cross paths again in Australia. You have a tour coming up, and we're going to be covering that at length a little more, talking about some great names over there in the next episode or two here on the show. But yeah, you're more than welcome if you want to talk a little bit more about Ron Fuller and later on in Australia or whatnot, please do.
Well, at the end of 72, I went to the Olympics in Munich. I wanted to watch. In 68, when I wrestled, the wrestling was on the last week of the games, the Greco-Roman wrestling. So the first 3 and 4 weeks of the Olympic Games, we were training twice a day. I never got to see anything. All those great Olympic events, the track and all that. Didn't get to see any of it. Swimming, none of the great stuff. When we got done with our wrestling, I think we had like 5 or 6 days left in the games. So I didn't really get to see much. So I wanted to go in, that was in 68. I wanted to go in 72 to watch the Olympics. I wanted, especially the wrestling. I had a girlfriend at the time, and we flew to Luxembourg. There was a flight from Miami to Luxembourg in Europe that was relatively inexpensive. So we flew there. We actually, we had the denim peg pants and tie-dye shirts and all that. We were doing the hippie thing. We actually hitchhiked from Luxembourg into Germany.
Okay.
What was embarrassing, we got a ride with a guy, a German guy, and we got in his car and didn't even know how to say hello in German. We talk about being embarrassed.
Smile and wave.
Yeah, well, that's basically what we did. But after the Olympics, I went to work in England, and I stayed with the promoter over there for the guy who had taken me to Iraq, George Valwisco. I stayed with him.
I can't believe you would go back and deal with that guy again.
Well, believe this. I ended up going back to Iraq again.
I remember seeing something that in my notes here in regards to it's crazy.
Well, what happened is that Jim Barnett had basically hot-shotted Australia to the point where you were well into the law of diminishing returns. He'd done everything. When I worked there, the last time I worked there, a town, I think it was Adelaide, Mark Lewin was the booker. They did a thing where he and Ken Curtis fought out into the street. There was like a movie theater type thing.
Wow, that's totally ahead of its time.
Oh, my God, fought out all the way out into the street. I remember there was a bus parked, and Mark Lewin was taking Ken Curtis and running his head into the side of the bus. Wow. Well, half the people in the audience followed him outside. So there's like a couple hundred people outside in the street watching this match out there. You talk about dangerous. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about hot shot. They would do anything to draw. And what happens is that you eventually, unless you actually murder somebody, what are you going to do? Use every gimmick you can. So a couple years earlier, one of my earlier tours, Barnett had asked me. I took my girlfriend with me to Australia, and Barnett loved her. She liked he liked to gossip, and he was in a gay life he was a queen, and he loved to, he was effeminate, and the guy was immaculately dressed. He was a promoter. It didn't matter what he was like. I mean, he was, if you wanted to work for him, you were going to treat him with respect. He loved dishing with my girlfriend and just gossiping about this and that. So I got to know him. And he also was kind to me. He would take me and introduce me to TV executives at different things, not for like a social event, but just in passing, because I was somebody with a background and the college education and an Olympic birth that he could trot out a little bit. It's hard to trot out. Now, Brute Bernard was a great wrestler and drew a lot of money. It was hard to trot him out at like a genteel, polite association cocktail party,
Exactly.
and have it fit in. So,
throw him in a suit? I don't know about that.
Yeah. So I had my place. Well, Barnett asked me one time if Eddie Graham and Buddy Fuller had ever said anything about him. And I was feeling a little bit, I had a bone to pick with Buddy for something. I can't remember exactly what. But I told him, and I knew what I was doing. I told him that, the only thing I heard, I said, I really don't understand it, Jim, because they said that you kill territories, that wherever you worked before, Indianapolis or wherever it was, that you killed the territory and then you left. And I said, I don't know how. I consider, I was looking at how well your promotion here in Australia has done. It's always been big houses all everywhere. So I find it hard to believe you've been here for years doing it. So, well, Barnett heard that and he got pissed and he started conniving. So over a period of time, he ended up selling or trading. It might have been a trade. I don't know if money passed hands or not. I'd like to find out, but it's not important. What he did is he traded a position at championship in Florida and or Georgia promotion, whatever Buddy Fuller and or Eddie Graham had stock in. He traded his stock in Australia, which I think was all of it. Maybe not. Maybe he had backers, but he traded it to them. And Buddy Fuller was going to come over to Australia to start. Now, the wrestling season in Australia ended about the last month before Christmas. It ended like November, end of November. And they took all of December off, maybe even more than that, but at least all of December, and didn't start up again until New Year. Well, Barnett had me, I was coming in to work there actually, he didn't bring me in. Eddie Graham called me and asked me to go in to work for, and in his interest, with Buddy Fuller was going to be coming in at the beginning of the next year to take over for Barnett.
Right.
So I was in England in the latter part of '72, and I needed to get to Australia. I wanted to get there early, and the only way I could afford it, I had to buy airfare for my girlfriend, and from England to Australia was, I don't know, a couple grand. I thought about it, and for the simple reason, as you've heard last couple of weeks, my experience in Iraq had scared me so badly. I actually thought that I had maybe was lacking in courage, and that when it really came down to the nitty gritty, that I didn't have it. I'm not a coward, but that I had I had a breaking point that not everybody does. So I was kind of at odds with myself, and I thought, here I'm staying with the guy that actually books Iraq, Rawisco.
Right.
So I thought about it, and I thought, why not? And I asked him if he could book me in Iraq again, and he could. So he did, and I went back there. Now that time, first of all, I knew that certain things had changed politically. Nixon had been, at the time I went in early '72, the president was Richard Nixon, and he had been big buddies with the Shah of Iran, and Saddam was kind of on the outs. Well, since that time, that position had changed. Things had warmed up between the United States and Iraq. So I checked. I went to the embassy in London and checked, and I found out that it would be the American embassy, and I found out that I would be safe if I went there. That they could keep track of me. I'd let them know what I was contemplating. They guaranteed they would have somebody from the interest section of the Belgian embassy actually meet me at the airport to make it known that they knew I was there, that they were looking out for me, and that nothing untoward was to happen. In other words, Saddam wasn't, or I didn't even know about Saddam, but the government of Baghdad, the mayor, whoever was the bad guy, they weren't going to be able to just snatch me and get rid of me. So it was more to test my own character, but also a way to get my girlfriend paid for. Instead of going, they would fly us to Iraq. Instead of flying us back to England, we would fly from Iraq to Australia. We did that. Meanwhile, again, Barnett has sold his share in Australia to Buddy Fuller. When we get to Australia, it's like mid-December. Fuller and his crew have not come in yet. In fact, and there's no shows running. So we get together with Jim and Jim Barnett, and he and my girlfriend are glad to see each other again and like to gossip and have a good time. What Barnett did was he booked us, my girlfriend and me, in different things. He booked her on a cooking show on TV, announcing the wife of a American wrestler. He booked me on there was a bodybuilding contest on Bondi Beach that I went down. I was a judge at. It was also on TV. He had me go to various newspapers, and I would take a $200 bottle of scotch or a case of champagne or something to various newspaper sports reporters or editors. And so what he was doing PR work for the upcoming season of wrestling. So we do this for a couple of weeks, and every day we're doing something. So a lot of publicity. Well, about the time that Fuller came in, Barnett flew to the United States for inauguration of Richard Nixon for his second term. And I saw a picture, and he brought a picture back with him. He was on the reviewing stand. He was standing in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the judges of the Supreme Court, in front of them. And I thought, what kind of guy has that kind of clout?
Yeah.
It turned out he was involved in something to do with art and had been a part of the government. And I probably was a big donor too, a big campaign donor. Well, anyway, Fuller comes in. He brings in, they still had Spiros Arion, they still had Mario Milano for the Greek and the Italian fans. But he brought in a bunch of guys, and don't get me wrong, they're the boys and they're fine and everything. But Barnett had the cream of the crop over there for 10, 15 years, however long he'd been promoting. Fuller brought in a bunch of guys that basically worked in like Alabama.
Alabama, right? Dick Dunn. I remember seeing his name. Don Carson. Nothing against Don. I mean, you have great stories with Don going all the way back, but I see what you're saying here in regards to it's no longer King Curtis, Iakea, and guys like that. I'm not saying he wasn't there off and on as well, but there were a lot of big names there for the last decade that people don't realize, and it's really easy to Google and look it up, but this is the original WCW, World Championship Wrestling in Australia. It made more money than any territory in any decade ever. Like it was huge, the Australia territory.
Oh yeah, and I mean, every time I worked there, the business was always great. I mean, it wasn't like half a house. It wasn't always sold out, but it was always a good house. You know, it was like 3/4 or more full every time. I never saw a bad one. Nowhere, not in Tasmania, not in New Zealand. It was always Drew. So, but Barnett, I think, knew maybe he wanted to go back to the States. Maybe he was tired of living overseas, but for whatever reason, he had kind of hot-shot it. So Fuller comes in. Now, the first week after Barnett's build-up during this month of layoff or where they're not working, the first week, he's gone now. The first week that they run, every show was sold out. I mean, the big ones, Sydney and Melbourne, were like on, I think, Friday and Saturday. Sydney Friday and Melbourne Saturday. And they were sold out. But the product that Buddy put out there, you know, it's brand new. you can try to start an angle, but they're all new talent except for Spiros and Mario. It's a card with no heat to it, and you don't have some major league like the NWA Champion or something like that. You don't have a headliner to like draw and to be able to come back to continue to draw. So the premise that what they were doing is they had started a tournament. They were going to have a tournament in all the towns with tournament matches, and the winner was going to be the Australian heavyweight champion. We did a week, and the houses, like I say, that first week are great. By the second week, they had dropped, by, let's say, a third. And by the third week, they had dropped by about a half. And Barnett came back from Australia about that time. He waited until they had dropped to like half. And he came back from Australia, and he walked into the building, or into the place where all the boys and Buddy Fuller was. He walked in. First time he came in, he said, "Oh my God, Buddy Fuller, you've killed my territory."
Oh my boy.
Yeah. Now remember, I told you about Buddy Fuller talking. I said the gossip that Buddy and Eddie had talked about Barnett killing territories.
Right.
So my belief is that Barnett set him up for this, and all his actions.
Well, I think the story goes, I'm not going to get into the reasons why supposedly Jim Barnett left the States to go over to Australia. That's a story in and of itself. My understanding was things were slowly starting to go south, and Barnett had realized that, and so he hot-shotted the territory intentionally and did exactly what the Fullers would do repeatedly after this down in Alabama, and sell it to a mark. And in this instance, it was Buddy Fuller was technically the mark, as he kind of, oh, wow, look at this, all this great stuff going on here. You guys are drawing these monster houses. Yeah, here's my 40% of Georgia, Jim, and we'll come in and we'll take over Australia. And then, they get duped by Jim Barnett.
Oh, yeah, big time. Now, back to the tournament. That was like the big picture of things. Within the smaller picture of the dynamics of what was happening in the promotion, they had this tournament, and there were a couple guys that entered this tournament. There were local boys. They were smart to the business. I had worked with them before in the pro ring.
Mm-hmm.
So they had signed up for this tournament just because they were kind of markish and inexperienced. They were just trying to get work. Well, Fuller asked me to stretch these guys and go out there and take them on in different matches and stretch them. And I said, well, buddy, these guys they're smart. They're boys. They're going to go out here thinking they're working.
Right.
He didn't want to pay them.
Oh, okay.
If they were booked.
And if you treat them like marks, then you don't have to pay them.
You don't have to pay them.
Right.
So he insisted.
Pro wrestling logic, people.
Yeah, he insisted that I stretch the guys. Well, I agreed to do it. I went out there, and when the referee got us together, as soon as the match started, I told the guy, I said, the promoter wants me to stretch you. I said, let's not do that. I said, we'll do this, blah, blah, blah. I'll just knock you in, hit you with a high knee and cover you. And they were agreeable to that. But
okay.
And after that, I went back and I told Buddy, I said, I didn't realize I came here as a shooter. I came here to work. But that was the reason he hired me. Eddie Graham sent me over there, again, with a guarantee of a big pay, a weekly pay. And when it came time to pay, Buddy Fuller got everybody together. He says, you're all making $700 a week. And that's it. And I walked out. When Barnett came back, a day or two later, I went to him and said, I was told I was supposed to get, I don't know, $1,200, something like that. He said, well, my boy, I'll give you a couple hundred extra, but don't tell the boys. Well, I gave my notice, but I wasn't going to. You can only, folks out there, you can only be put down and screwed if you let yourself be it. I mean, if you have any choice, you can just decide you're not going to do it. If you can, any way you can avoid it. So I said, well, okay. But meanwhile, I still had a couple of weeks to work off. Well, I'm not shooting with these marks. In one show, I'll tell you, I'm not sure if this is in sequence, but in Melbourne, they had a guy entered the tournament that when they had the match, they sent out a local boy who had been a job guy there. He was a high flyer. He could drop kick and do all that. For some reason, they sent him out there to wrestle against a person from the audience, or like an entry from the real world. And this guy came down the aisle. He had a pair of shorts, no shoes. It looked like he could have been a Bulgarian or something. He probably weighed about 170, 80 pounds. Well, he got in the ring with this kid from Australia, and he took him down. He rode him for 20 minutes. 20 minutes.
Wow.
The kid couldn't get away. He couldn't get to the ropes. I was sitting up in the balcony upstairs at the back of the building, up in the dark where I could see and people couldn't see me. I saw Buddy Fuller come out to watch the match, and within 5 seconds of the guy taking his boy down, the pro wrestler down, he started pacing. And by the time 20 minutes, I thought he was going to commit suicide. The way he looked so agitated, because basically they killed the town. Because the next week it was half that, because they exposed the business. This kid, you know how the kid actually beat him was the Bulgarian or whatever he was. He blew up. He finally got tired. He was in the corner, and the kid drop kicked him when the guy was backed against the ropes. Mm-hmm. He drop kicked him in the breadbasket, and he knocked the wind out of him. And the guy just got out of the ring and left. But it was a total embarrassment.
Sounds like a debacle.
Oh my God! It could have. How could it have been?
Let me
worse?
ask you: this tournament idea that Buddy Fuller had here, was this like was this the drawing point of all of the shows at this point in time? Like, we're just going to have this endless tournament here in all the cities to try to get people to come because they want to come see this awesome tournament. Is that what was happening, or
the world champion, the NWA champion, was going to be coming in like a month later, whatever? Okay. And the winner of the tournament got to compete for the belt. That's what it was.
Okay.
It was for the end. The winner would get, and it was going to be Ron Fuller. Now that's Melbourne dead, and it was. The next couple of times I worked there, it got worse and worse. But in Sydney, for some reason, now again, I've refused. I wasn't going to go out. I said, I'll go out and shoot. If you're going to pay me to shoot, I'll go out there. I want $200 a match show. Every time I go out there and do it, I want $200. Well, he wasn't going to pay me. So, I mean, it's stupid. I mean, in hindsight, for some reason, I have no idea whatsoever how anybody could have been thinking anything at all about this. Ron Fuller goes out there, and in Sydney now, your major town. Melbourne's, they're both, big cities, but Sydney's like, because the wrestlers lived there, or, their residence was there. I mean, you were on the road all the time, but you lived in Sydney, and the office was in Sydney, so it's like home base. It was kind of like Tampa being the home base, even though Miami's on the card. Tampa was considered the center of championship wrestling for Florida. Well, right. Sydney was considered the home city for Barnett's promotion. So Fuller comes out there, and this guy comes down the aisle. He's probably 5'10", so he's about 8, 9, 10 inches shorter than Fuller. He weighs about 170 pounds. He's tanned. He's got on a pair of khaki pants with a rope belt. He was a nice-looking guy. He looked like a surfer. He looked tanned, well-built, and to this day, I'm still astounded. After 8 minutes, the guy ended up just getting out on the apron, saluting the crowd, getting down and walking back out the same way he came in. He got a big hand. Meanwhile, Fuller's in the ring. His hair's all messed up. Both elbows are scraped, and you can see that it's not bleeding, but you can see red. He's got blotches all over his body. When the guy, he's huffing and puffing. What happened was every time that he would try to do something to the guy'd get to the ropes, and he didn't know what to do about it. So after 7, 8 minutes, he hadn't done anything to the guy. And I don't know what he thought he was going to do. I mean, the guy obviously it wasn't a work. But I don't know what he never tried to put any kind of hold on him. I don't know what he could have been thinking. To
be clear real quick, Bob, because I don't want to cut you off. I just want to understand this. Buddy was booking Ron, as you said, he's going to win the tournament here to take on the world champion. So I'm assuming that means Ron was in like the main event scene here.
Well, this wasn't the main event. It was like an earlier match, a tournament match.
No, I get that. I just meant like if he's going to be working the world champion, Ron's being seen here as a top talent.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
He was going to be the star.
Okay. That's what I was trying to understand here. Why would you put your star in a situation like this regardless?
Again, I wasn't privy. Believe me, I was the farthest thing from their inner circle that I could be. I didn't have any problem with the boys. Don Carson and I used to travel together in Australia. I like Don a lot. But I didn't know a lot of the guys. Greg Peterson. I mean, you had a guy like Greg. Now, don't get me wrong. Greg's a great guy. But Greg was about 5'5", 180 pounds, and was kind of dumpy. Louis Gillette, and don't get me wrong, that's fine. He was a good talent. He made a career. So, I mean, all has to, but compared to Brute Bernard and, some of the monsters they had in there, it doesn't match, it doesn't, you can't follow.
You can definitely see, a huge change in the roster here. There's no more crazy Luke Graham. There's no more Big Bad John. There's a lot of the bigger names and the bigger, the guy body-wise, the bigger stars like that too, gone from the territory as Buddy Fuller takes over, and he's kind of working some of the guys that he knows, and I can't blame him for that, into the shows, but I would imagine that some of these guys just didn't catch on like a wildfire.
Not at all.
But again, I'm looking at, you work Spiros Arion quite a bit here, so I mean he's there, like you said, Mario Milano's there, but some of you need a good heel to take on, the baby faces. And so Ron Fuller, in Buddy's eyes, his son, Ron Fuller, is it. He's going to be that next big baby face star here in the Australia territory. And he's sent out here to work. I'm assuming this guy that you just described was just somebody out of the crowd, so to speak.
Yes. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
And this guy decides after 7 or 8 minutes, well, he's not getting me, but I'm not getting him either. And I'm done with this, so he gives a little salute on the apron, and I wish that was on film. Nothing to do with Ron, just I would like to have seen that done to anyone. That's just...
the kid got a big hand. The kid got a big hand. Ron Fuller looked like 2 cents waiting for change. I mean, how could you... He was dead. He was dead in Sydney.
That's what I was going to ask you next. What do we do with Ron Fuller after that happens? Does Buddy just ignore that and continue on the path that he wanted to go with Ron at this point? Or does he have to call an audible and change everything up?
I left, and I'm not sure what happened. And when I got back to the States, I will come back to Australia in a second. I went to Charlotte, and after a couple of months, I referred to it last week, John Ringling almost got me killed. Right. I took six months off where I didn't have anything to do with the wrestling business.
Yeah, I see that.
I didn't watch matches. So I don't know what happened in Australia. I don't know how long it lasted, how long it was before they had to fold up their tent.
No, I was just curious, was there anything else before you left Australia? Do you remember anything else in regards to the Ron Fuller push here or the Buddy Fuller booking? I've heard the stories over and over about how Jim Barnett basically traded or sold Buddy Fuller, a pig in a poke, this Australia territory that he had hot-shotted and knew that it was going to basically fail once he handed it over to Buddy. So, but I haven't heard a lot about what went on in Australia while Buddy was booking there, while he was promoting there, I should say. Yeah, I'm curious to get anything I can out of you with that. So, but I see some of the names still there, and I'm looking forward, on next episodes, we're going to get a little deeper into this because I'm just going to ask you some of the names here, like I said, Spiros Arion and whatnot, because not a lot of people have a lot to tell about names like that. So I thought it would be cool to kind of fashion those guys on the next episode. And we'll probably even get into Crockett by that point as well, since we've covered so much of your Australia run here. But I do want to go back too, because you were in Australia back in 1972 on the next episode. So we'll talk a lot more about Australia next time around. But this was more, I'm just curious if any more Buddy Fuller from the early days here.
Well, just let me get back to Australia just for a second.
Absolutely.
An analysis based on what I'm thinking now was that Buddy Fuller only had the promotional experience that he had picked up in Alabama, Mobile, and Florida. In fact, Buddy's idea was, we talked about where they had Jack Briscoe go on television and try to hard way this poor victim.
Yes.
That he ended up punching him a couple dozen times and made a heel out of Jack, and that wasn't the purpose. And it was disgusting. It was just horrible. But that kind of thing was Buddy's idea. Now that stuff and the fact that Don Fargo worked in the Deep South, in the Mid South, and we made a living out of working in that area with the hard way stuff. That was Buddy's mentality about how to promote. So what's he going to bring to Australia? He's going to bring to Australia his way of promoting that he had been doing in the United States, which again was this kind of small town, or not small town, but it's not Madison Square Garden. Let's put it that way. It's more like Knoxville, Tennessee, or whatever. It's not Australia. Let's put it that way. Sydney is a big metropolitan city, and Melbourne is too. They got people from all over the world there. You're hitting them with basically like a local promotional philosophy.
Right.
Mario Milano and Spiros Arion, they drew, and I'm sure some of the houses that were drawn later came because those guys were on the card. In fact, when Buddy talked about $700 a week and got all the guys together, Spiros and Mario weren't there. They had their own deal.
I'm sure they would. Yeah, they were going to be working if they weren't getting more. That would have to think.
Spiros, I think he had a home in Greece. I know he worked in the United States and he worked at the WWF, living away from your home country and living in a foreign land for $700 a week when he'd probably been making twice that or more for years. I doubt very seriously if he would do that. He could do better somewhere else. Let's put it that way. So Buddy is going to go into the idea of promoting it, that we're going to have a promotional change here. And you know what? That might have worked if you had time. If you had like $1 million to spend, because you're going to lose money for a while until you get your new philosophy built up. Now you're doing it on your TV too, and people will watch the TV because they don't have to leave their lazy boy to do it. They'll watch your TV, so you can build it up over a couple months, 3 months time. But during that time in the house shows, after seeing people like Brute Bernard and the top guys in the country, workers and gimmick guys,
Bulldog Brower.
Brower, oh, what a story he is. Well, you talk about living your gimmick out on the street. The guy was a maniac. So you got guys like that are true characters, and you bring in a bunch of guys that, don't get me wrong, I got all the respect in the world for the guys, and I wish them all rest in peace, the guys that are gone. But they weren't up to the standards that these people were used to.
Yeah.
It's like bringing in a B team, and you just can't expect it to succeed right away. Again, if they've been able to promote it and get their new philosophy over and get some heat on some people.
Establish the talent.
Yeah, over 2 or 3, 4 months' time. But when you start losing money, Burnett might have been paying for the TV for all I know. Anyway, that would be something to maybe talk about later about how long before what happened there. Did they fold up the tent? Did they go out of business or what? But I do want to know, I want to repeat, this isn't revenge, but in a way it is. I'm just curious why Ron Fuller would spend all these years talking about me when he knows I was a witness to what had to be the most embarrassing moment of his career to this day. I mean, he would look like a total doofus out there. He's supposed to be this champion, and I'm afraid that he wasn't. Now, folks out there, please forgive me. I'm coming across as being kind of mean here, but you got to understand, I've had a guy calling me all kinds of names for years and years now that I've never had an opportunity to respond to until now. And so I'm going to take advantage of it. I don't wish Ron Fuller any harm. I don't want anything horrible to happen to him. But he's blacking my name wherever he could. And, my sons also have my name. My grandchildren also have my name. So if they're listening to podcasts, they might have, or other people might come up to them and say, hey, yeah, this guy Ron Fuller's talking about a guy named Roop, Bob Roop. You know him? Yeah, it's my grandpa. Oh, yeah, he said Bob's a real jerk. Yeah, Bob did this and that, and Bob stole this, and Bob did horrible things. Yeah, my relatives and my family has to hear that crap. So anybody that feels it's unfair for me to be saying this, well, you're welcome to your opinion. But I felt like I don't go out of my way to knock people because, you know what, a lot of times you have to make up stuff. Well, I don't have to make this up. This is what happened. Anybody still alive that was there, I'm sure Ron will never forget it.
But I'm imagining he's never told that story that happened in Australia. I could be wrong. I don't know. But just the way Ron sells himself, I feel like maybe that story's never been told before. So maybe we got a new story out there.
What did he call himself? The Tennessee Stud?
The Tennessee Stud.
Oh, my God. Well, the stud looked like he lost something on the way to the ring on that one. He got in there a gelding.
Well, I can't even really blame Ron in that instant. Well, he agreed to it. He didn't pull Buddy aside and say, Dad, I don't think this is a good idea. That's not my shtick. But, yeah, that's crazy that his father would even put him in a situation like that.
Out of their mind. I mean, how could you possibly take a risk? I mean, he didn't even know enough to know what might happen.
Right.
Because he was like, well, he was huffing and puffing watching this guy take his career there in Sydney down the aisle with him as he walked out. He was probably wondering, well, what the hell just happened? And believe me, I know, I've been there. I had it happen to me, that same thing. And I'm capable. So, yeah. And again, Ron's got it coming. I don't pick on people that don't have it coming. That's another thing I want to say, too. Ray, you've talked about people giving you grief on stuff you put out there. Mm-hmm. And I've been getting a little, and I don't have a problem with it. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I appreciate it. I do. If people watch me or listen to our podcast and they say, I think you're wrong and you're this and that, that's fine, because they're listening to our podcast. If they weren't, and they just said, well, I heard that you said this, and I think you're this and that, that'd be different. But if you're listening to the podcast, okay, you don't like what I say, you don't agree, you're upset about it, that's fine. But what bothers me is that sometimes the criticism is based on something I say about a person that goes against their public stature.
Right.
And I'm talking about their private stature. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, say, Gordon Soley. I'm not talking about Gordon Soley when I write about him on my Facebook page. I'm not talking about Gordon Soley, the announcer. I'm not talking about his announcing. His announcing was great. But I'm talking about Gordon Soley, the person, because that's who I was dealing with.
Yeah, well, that also goes to personal experiences, too. These are things that are actually happening. These are facts that you're telling. People might not like that. They might not want to see their heroes perceived in that light, but you're simply sharing stories of your trip throughout wrestling history. And unfortunately, all these guys that we loved growing up and watching on TV and this, that, and the other, there's another side to them. And I'm not saying everybody had a dark side, but everybody, nobody's as innocent as they look. And I'm sure there's stories about well, there you go.
Lance Armstrong, Bill Cosby. There's a bunch of people that had a life beyond what their public persona was seeing that was dark as it could be.
Sure.
They were the opposite of being really great, wonderful people. So, there's a lot of that. Now, for anybody out there who has my difference with my opinion about anything, or with Ray's, I'm pretty sure that both of us can back up what we're saying. And one way I can do it is there's a book called The Soley Chronicles. I've mentioned it before. I read that before I ever said a word about Gordon publicly. And the book was written by his daughter. And some of the things I say are corroborated, in fact, enhanced by reports I learned from reading about what his daughter wrote about it.
Right. So who would have more information and personal experiences with Gordon than his actual family, right?
Well, they spent time in his personal life with him for years and years and years, which I didn't. I was at his home, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 times over the years, having dinner or for one reason or another, but they were with him full time. So when they're making these opinions about, again, that he was a flawed character because of what happened to him in his life, the way he was brought up, and what the circumstances of upbringing created some real, and the guy was an unhappy guy. So what bothers me about criticism is that it should be based on reality. So if someone wants to read the Soley Chronicles and then come to want to swap opinions about what I'm saying about Gordon or anybody else, and the things that you say, I know you have evidence to back it up, data, real life. It's not just your opinion. It's not because you don't like somebody or because you love someone else. It's based on what happened. And you have visual or video or audio evidence of it. So where's the beef here? We can back up what we say. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying it. I'm not going to knock anybody. In fact, these things about Gordon aren't knocks. It's just what happened.
Right.
You can read it into it any way you want. You can say, well, Bob, you're a real butthead. I think whatever Gordon did was okay, because you're a jerk. That's fine too. It's your opinion. You're welcome to it. My poor departed wife kind of thought that way sometimes too. Anyway, I just wanted to clear the air with that.
Totally cool.
Again, we're not done with Ron Fuller, but I almost felt bad. At the time, I didn't have any heat with Ron. I felt bad for him. It had to be. I'd been there myself. I told a story about the one in Tampa where I had the only choice I could do was this guy that kept getting to the ropes. Same thing as Ron. I didn't know hooks yet. The only thing I could do if I was going to beat him was break his neck. And I decided not to do that. So he ended up, after going 4 or 5 minutes in the ring with me, he gets out and goes back to his seat. And I'm left there standing in the ring with my thumb in my butt.
And that's when Hiro Matsuda taught you how to hook.
Yes. You talk about being embarrassed. So believe me, I understand how Ron felt. He had to feel absolutely horrible. But I think he was also experienced enough by that time to realize his chances of getting over in that town were absolutely zero.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I can't say this is 100% accurate, but I do notice that there's just an abrupt departure of Ron from the Australia territory. He comes in like a lion. He's going over every week on pretty much everyone. And then all of a sudden, he jobs on the way out and he disappears immediately. So I think it's safe to say that it probably happened shortly after this situation you're referencing, because I think even Papa Buddy realized that, Ron, we killed you. We can't do this with you, buddy, so I'll send you back to the United States. It seems to be what happened here with Ron Fuller, so very interesting.
Well, again, it's hard to feel sorry for Ron. He was born into a wrestling family. He ended up having a couple of promotions, and he was kind of always guaranteed that there was going to be a door open for him somewhere through family connections, which is fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not upset about that. But it's hard to feel sorry for a guy when he's put in a position where he can make up to $1 million a year through no personal quality other than association of, being relatives, being a member of a family. So that was good fortune for him, and I have no problem. And I wouldn't have any problem with Ron if he quit knocking me.
Yeah,
but know what? You know what happened? I was gone for a long time. And when I was rethinking some things the other day about what you told me. In fact, I was listening to one of our former podcasts. They were talking about Ric Flair making the deal about, that Dick Slater beat up Bob Roop and left him laying in a pile of his own blood. I was thinking, how could Flair possibly think that he could say that and get away with it? And what I realized, I had been gone from the scene for so long. I mean, the first 10 years I was out of the business, I never watched TV. I don't think I watched it one time because I'd lived it for 15 years. I didn't need it. I'd had enough of it. What got me started back was being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Oh, what are you going to turn them down? So, doing that, and I found out I enjoyed mingling with fans who came up, and we didn't have to kayfabe, we didn't have to treat them like, that we had some big secret.
Right.
You could talk, openly. We used to hate your guts and all that. Well, it's a compliment, instead of they're not saying it in anger, they're saying it in admiration. I enjoyed that. So I got more involved, but I still don't watch TV. I don't watch wrestling on TV because I've seen it. I watched it ad nauseum for 15 years. Now I'm going to start, for your comfort level, I'm going to start watching more. I want to try and get some ideas of but we've got time. Get some ideas of what's going on so we can just discuss more modern things. But right now we're just getting me taken care of, so we don't have to worry about these other things yet.
Well, next time around, there's a couple names I was hoping to get to here this week, but man, you had a lot of fun stories, so no complaints here. The Jimmy Garvin stuff caught me off guard, and I loved it. So really happy with everything we got in here this week. And next week, maybe some of the names on tap. I don't know how much you have to talk about them, but obviously I name dropped him here. Spiros Arion, I'm kind of a fan of his run there. Oh, yeah. I was just amazed at his run, his heel work, his heel turn, and his work against Bruno. Some of the loudest noise I've ever heard in an arena. I felt my TV screen shaking when he worked Bruno in the Garden, that much heel heat on Spiros Arion. But I'm just curious, hear about him and maybe a few other names here as you worked around these guys. Not necessarily your memories of them in Australia, but just I'm sure you crossed paths with some of these names time and time again. Bulldog Brower, Crazy Luke Graham, guys like that. And also, I mentioned, before we went on the air, there's a couple other guys that you worked with right around this time in Florida before you went over to Australia, guys like George Bunk Harris, just kind of a guilty pleasure. So I'm looking forward to giving you some name drops here next week. And I will be going off on vacation for the week following, guys. So we're going to get into a lot of names, and we're going to have a lot of fun next week on the show as well, Bob. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for your adroit, skillful management of my blathering and blithering. But we, whether they come in sequence or from left field, we do get our stories out there.
And absolutely. And the names, thank God, and I'm not trying to put myself over here, but thank God I've studied, the history of the business to know wherever you're going, wherever you zig or zag, I'm right with you because I know the names you're bringing up. So it makes it a little easier to stay on point.
Oh, what a blessing you are to work with, Ray. I mean, you can bring me right back on track and not just say, think about it. If I said, well, okay, Ray, where do we go from here? You say, I don't know. You're just too far in left field. I'm stumped. I think we'll go to black.
Well, you never know. That day may come sometime. But right now we're doing a pretty good job. And no, it was fun times talking about the Garvins, really everything. Ronnie Garvin, loved the stories here this week. And got in a Ron Fuller story. And really, without even trying, you kicked off some of the story for Australia. So you've kind of set the stage, at least for the 73 run. But we'll get into more of that. We'll look at some of the other names there that you worked there in 72 and 73. And we'll look at maybe a couple other guys you worked in Florida around 72 as well. And then, guys, once I return from a week off vacation, we're going to be tackling some major stories. We're going to go through your run in the Mid-South territory. I got that broke down. It's going to be a hell of a time. Can't wait to talk about the Dog, Paul Orndorff, Ted DiBiase, a guy by the name of Bob Roop, the Samoans, Ernie Ladd. So many guys there in that territory. Bob Orton, another guy you crossed paths with many a times in your career.
Jimmy Garvin.
Yes, Jimmy Garvin, absolutely. Oh, that's a how could I have forgotten? Yeah, lots of guys.
Yeah, some good guys.
Gotta be fun.
The Iron Sheik.
Yeah, Sheiky Baby was there.
What a story. Oh, we've got some great stories about him in the Mid-South.
Oh, man. It's probably great stories about him in any territory.
Oh, yeah, no matter where it is. He's a story just sitting there.
Oh, my God. Yes, absolutely. So, man, I had a blast, and I'm looking forward to getting into all those names. And then, like I said, on the other side of the vacation, we'll get into that Mid-South run. It's going to be a fun time, Bob.
Well, I agree. I'm looking forward to it. And thanks for this session, Ray. Again, I'm eternally and steadily grateful for being able to do this. I mean, I don't take it for granted. It's a privilege and a pleasure that you open up this opportunity for me. And I'm really, really thankful and grateful for you for doing it. And it's a pleasure to work with you, my friend.
Same here, Bob.
Oh, wait a minute. One more word.
Yeah.
Are we still on?
Yep.
Anybody out there listening, thank you. Without you, Ray and I enjoy each other's, over the airwaves, but he's right now got things he needs to go do, and I need to go to bed. So, but we would only have each other to talk to. Having you out there is what makes us be able to do this. So thank you very much. Stay well.
Thank you, Bob, again so very much for all the great stories here. And a reminder that you guys can friend Bob over at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And of course, be sure to check out that $5 all-access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many gifts, guys, for just $5, and every penny of it going right back here into the podcast network. So please show your support. Help keep all of the great shows here, like this one, up and running. We greatly appreciate each and every one of the listeners. And we'll be back soon with another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop.